Hi, everyone. I'm Niki Luibrand. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I'm the care counselor for the College of Fine Arts.
Well, welcome. Thanks you so much for sitting down.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, it's so great that we have someone like you here in the building. I think it's great for people to put a face to a name. And so I'd love for you to kind of introduce yourself and maybe tell me a little bit, how did you get inspired into this kind of work?
Oh, sure. Yeah, my name is Niki Luibrand. I'm the care coordinator here. I am a licensed clinical social worker and the care coordinator for the college. I think it started probably for me. I was a degree switcher in undergrad. I think I came in wanting to study like journalism and took a psychology course in my second semester, and immediately, I was like, I have to change majors. I think this is like my calling. Something that merged writing and like the mind. I think I just have always been fascinated by how people's minds work. I studied developmental psychology in undergrad, so I think I got really into like stages of life and development, and I think looking at what happens when different milestones aren't met or different things happen to different people at these like very critical points in their life, and like what that can look like for their trajectory moving forward. And I think that was my first introduction to like emerging adulthood, that 18 to 20 something age range, and how they actually are going through like really specific stuff at that point in time, add college onto that. And I think I got really even more inspired to do it during the pandemic, just kind of seeing where mental health was going and like following those trends. And I was sitting in private practice at that time, and then kind of felt called to do something on like a collegiate level. I'd never done that before. So I think that's kind of where it started, just being able to sit down with people and kind of figure out like, hey, what happened at this point? What could have been done differently to have maybe like a different outcome? And I think it's nice to be able to sit down and like do that with people on an individual level.
When you were doing private practice, was it an individual level or what did it look like?
For sure, yeah. And I think for me at that point, I kind of started out being like focused on children and adolescents and families. I think I really like wanted to work with kids, and I really enjoyed that work. And I think right at kind of the height of the pandemic, I remember I was working in a community health clinic where I was also like an embedded counselor. So the embedded role is not necessarily new to me, but definitely a different environment being back in academia. And I was seeing the impacts of the pandemic and the social isolation on my teenagers, and knew that in just a couple of years they would be kind of launching and going off to college. So when the opportunity came to come to UT, I was like, oh, I could get to see that continuation, see that development, and kind of see how it's looking on the other side.
Yeah, it's so interesting. So like you're in undergrad class and you get like so fascinated by this, especially like you were talking about like that specific age group.
Right.
And now you're dealing with pretty much that specific age group.
Absolutely.
And so what are some challenges? I know, like I remember being that age, and it was that in junior high, very challenging times.
100%. I think
right?
we all agree that those are like the two.
Yes, and it only gets easier. I feel like now I haven't gone all the way through life,
right?
But for me, it's gotten easier and easier. So, like, what are some specific things that people of that age group have to deal with?
Man, I think. I mean, there's so much socio-politically too. I think about like exactly what you're saying, like 10 or 15 years ago, I remember it being stressful, but I don't remember it being like as palpable maybe as it is now. I think there's just so many things, like different things like happening and like going on in the world. Social media is, such a thing that like maybe wasn't a thing when I was, in college. It was just kind of groundbreaking things that were happening in like the, early 2000s.
We didn't have it at all, and it was wonderful.
Honestly, yeah, I talk about that a lot. I think we talk about that a lot at our house, about like what that looked like and like what it would have been like to not have that. So many positives, but I also think like I think it's just created so much of a comparison bubble. And I think that's hard even for adults that are struggling with that or have always kind of struggled with that. Imposter syndrome, I think that comes up a lot, like even specifically like in this college of I'm looking at my peers and, I don't know that I'm on par with them or what they're doing. I feel behind. There's no real reason that I feel that way. It's just this, I look around and it seems like people have their stuff together and I don't. So I think that I hear that a lot.
And like, what if someone is dealing with imposter syndrome? What do you tell them?
Yeah, I mean, I think like a lot of it is everybody's in this kind of fake it till you make it thing. I don't know. I remember that a lot about college too, about everyone's kind of trying to put their best foot forward and navigate and look like they're an expert at all these different things. And everyone's got their strong points, I think, for sure. But I would definitely, I always like caution of like, are the things that you're telling yourself like true? Like, is it helpful? Like, is it doing like what you need to do? And I mean, I think typically, there's usually that like, oh no, it's not, that's not helpful. I don't really have any evidence to support that. That's just kind of how I'm personally feeling. Even my friends will kind of refute my statements and tell me that that's not true. But, I think it's hard to get out of that mindset for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and then, talking about, these generations, one thing, like, I think my generation did really bad, but we were kind of doing what all the previous generations did, is there was a little bit of a stigma around asking for help.
For sure.
And that's something that just, that when I was growing up, there was, and, my parents and their parents for forever. Yeah. But so what would you say? I feel like those walls are coming down and there's less and less stigma every day. But obviously they might still be getting some stigma from, their parents or other older people. What would you say to someone who was struggling and maybe looking for some help?
Yeah, I think ultimately too, I always like to talk to students about this level of autonomy I think they have at this level. I think I see students and there are so many people that this is their first, kind of exploration into therapy, which that's my favorite, honestly. That's like one of my favorite groups to work with. And I think that is honestly the majority of the students that I'm seeing, people that are like, yeah, maybe I asked to do it when I was a teenager, but that either kind of got pushed to the side as like, oh, you'll be okay, you'll be fine. Or, it was a flat out like, no, we're not going to go the route of like therapy or counseling or, we're not going to do that because of what that, like you said, that stigma of like, oh, what does that look like? Is that weakness? Like what's the reasoning for that? And I think what I try to tell them is that it's okay to not have things completely like figured out. And, even if you're just looking for like a launching point, there really doesn't have to be a direction to go in that, even in that first meeting or that first conversation. We're just having a conversation about support systems or, what that looks like, or what are you wanting to get out of the college experience that maybe you feel like you're not getting. I'm hoping it's setting people up to not feel super pressured or for things to have to go really clinical in like a very, in a very like quick way if that's like not what they're ready to do.
Do you feel like the stigma is breaking down a little bit?
I absolutely do. Yeah. I think, again, like you said, generationally, I think we're getting so much better, I think, in terms of like emotional intelligence too. I think like matching up, I think so long I saw so many people who I think, that wasn't the case. There wasn't the knowledge. There wasn't the vocabulary because that, just wasn't, like you said, previous generations, nobody was really talking about it. And I think about even with my own undergraduate experience, I knew there was a counseling center, but I didn't know anybody that accessed those things. Or if they did, that was something that was very, maybe kept to themselves. I'm thinking about my friend group, like just about my friends. And I'm like, I don't know anybody that accessed those services. And I don't think I even learned about it until it was almost time to graduate or until I was in graduate school, focused on mental health, and then learned that was a place that you could do an internship. And I was like, oh, we actually have one of those. Who knew? So yeah, I do. I think it's breaking down. And I think what I'll say about this generation too, people's friends have really stepped up in this space where, you're kind of detached from parents and maybe that's your first time like being truly away from family or whatever that looks like. People have talked to me about their friends really showing up and being really well-versed, even if it's like from therapy talk or whatever, things that people are looking at now. I think it's very much, people will tell me, my friends, have set a really good boundary and they're willing to like help me and be supportive. But when it gets to past a certain point, it's like, hey, maybe you should, go talk to somebody about this, or did you know this resource was available in the school just for more support. So I will say, I think people have done a better job of maybe not taking that on as friends or making your friends kind of feel like your therapist or your counselor. I think it's definitely been more that, hey, we're good to this point, and then maybe this is something that you talk to somebody else about, so we can kind of maintain the relationship that we have, and it doesn't, the lines don't get blurred.
Yeah, that's great. And there's obviously many differences between a friend and a licensed, therapist, but one of them is confidentiality.
Right.
Right. And, people are going to be telling you unbelievably hard things, right? What does confidentiality look like when they're talking to you?
Oh, for sure. That's, I think, the first thing I go over, even in that initial session, even going back to my phone triages that I kind of do before someone even sets up an initial appointment. I'm talking about that with them on the phone, and reminding them that everything that we talk about, stays in the room with us. Unless somebody gives somebody written permission, you have to sign a release of information. All that stuff is like HIPAA, confidential. So someone would have to sign a release to have someone access their records.
And for those people who don't know, HIPAA is they're very strict laws.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure. Dealing with like health information and like especially like sensitive identifying information. So they would have to give their written consent to be able to do that. I always remind students too that the counseling center records don't intersect with academic records at all. I always think that's a big point of emphasis for anybody who's not familiar with the process and is really concerned about, oh, my professor's going to find out that I'm going to therapy, or some mentor that I have within the community is going to find out that I'm going, and like, what is that going to look like is that going to change our relationship? And the answer is like, no, they don't have any access to any of that information. Obviously, I think I try to go over to when there would be the possibility of a confidentiality, like having to kind of break that. And that usually only happens when there's like a significant safety concern. Like if we're concerned about a student's like personal safety or concerned about another person's safety, those kind of things are a little bit more nuanced, but as a general rule.
So now we've talked a lot about like if you feel like you're struggling, kind of reaching out, but the Butler School here, they perform at an unbelievable high level. Absolutely. I'm sure you've heard some of the concerts.
Yes.
It's incredible, right?
Absolutely.
What these young people do.
Yeah.
But that's not easy, right? And there's a lot of pressure to getting up on that stage.
Right.
And with that can come stage fright, anxiety, all sorts of like stuff. And so what if you see if you maybe have a member in an ensemble or a friend who you think is really struggling?
Yeah.
What would you recommend to that person?
Yeah, I think a couple of different options. And again, I think some of it goes back to confidentiality. I think I obviously am sitting in kind of a different relationship with confidentiality than a student would be talking about their friend. I don't know that maybe the first step would necessarily be to come to me. Because generally speaking, whenever a staff member or a grad assistant or anybody like that is making a referral to come and see me, I want them to have had that conversation with the student where it's not just like a blind referral and me calling the student and then being like, wait, what? I don't remember giving kind of consent to that. So I think for students who have a peer or somebody that they notice is struggling, talking to a mentor within the program, if that's possible. There also is like overall like UT-wide, the behavior concerns and advice line. And that's like bcal.utexas.edu. There's a website kind of for that gives more information about that. It's kind of a partnership between the counseling center and the Office of the Dean of Students and Health Point Wellness and like UTPD. But it's a place where you can either submit a concern online or call a line and speak to someone about somebody that you're concerned about. If, say, a peer is missing class or you haven't seen them in a while, and you're kind of worried about what might be going on, if you notice somebody behaving erratically, like in the building or during a class or something like that, and that applies to faculty and staff as well.
We can act erratically.
Yeah, we can act for sure. Or if you notice that about it, notice that about a professor or something like that, you can call this line or you can submit a report online, and you can report anonymously. So you don't have to necessarily give identifying information as to who you are. Again, I will say, like, if there are significant safety concerns, they may want to collect more information to be able to, help the person that's kind of in crisis. But as a general rule, you can make those reports anonymously of just like, hey, I've been concerned about this person in this class, and give that information there. And then typically I think the Office of like Student Outreach and Support, formerly Student Emergency Services, kind of goes through their process of figuring out how to best help.
As a man, the two hardest things for me, asking for directions and asking for help, right?
Yeah.
Something, my wife reminds me all the time. So, so I can only imagine someone in who's really struggling with something, how hard it must be to reach out that first time and contact you. Can you just walk me through what the whole process looks like from when they first reach out and contact you all the way through maybe the first kind of session?
Sure. Yeah. Typically, gosh, there's so many ways to reach out now. So many like fun QR codes and things that people can do, which I think is great for people who, generationally we're moving further and further away from phones. And I would love for in the future, maybe there to be like even a texting and real time option that's HIPAA compliant and all of those things. We haven't gotten to that point yet, but I'm hoping that that's where technology is moving. Because I know I talk to students all the time and they're like, I don't want to talk on the phone. And I said, yeah, I'm not a phone person either. But people can reach out and call me and call my phone directly. That goes to a confidential like voicemail box that only I have access to, and I'll give them a call back. Students can drop in person during my office hours. My office is over in the Doty Fine Arts Building on the ground floor, and my office hours are Mondays from 3:30 to 4:30 p.m. this semester. Students can come by any other time when my door is open. It doesn't have to just be during that office hours. That's that set allotted time for students, staff, faculty to come consult. But they don't, you can come by anytime my door is open. There's now a fun poster plastered on my door that has a QR code for anybody that comes by. If I'm not in the office or they're like, hey, I really want to reach out for support, but I really don't want to call. I don't know if I want to show up in person yet. They can kind of scan that QR code and give me their information and like the best time to call them. And then I can kind of reach out that way. So that's another option. Students can also be referred by staff and faculty, like I mentioned earlier. If a professor or advisor or somebody has a concern or a student voices a concern about maybe something mental health related impacting their academic work, they have their own referral form in Qualtrics that sends directly to my inbox. I get that, and I'm able to access that information. And I always tell staff and faculty, I want that to be a conversation that you're having with the student first, again, so that it's not just me reaching out blind and the student has no idea why I'm contacting them. So usually that's a conversation between like, hey, I'm thinking you may need some more support. How would you feel about me making this referral? Again, the students don't have to respond. You don't have to do anything with their referral necessarily, but it's nice to, sometimes people like that somebody else has got their back and then is willing to kind of do like the legwork for them. Some people prefer to reach out directly. I'll say in the entire college, I get more self-referral actually. So more students just reaching out kind of their own accord, and less through the referral pipeline. And so I do a phone call or an in-person, just quick 10 to 15 minute, I call it a triage. It's mostly just collecting general information. Have you ever done any kind of counseling before? Collecting some information on, what level you're in the program or what program you're a part of. Have you ever been hospitalized for a mental health reason? Ever had any history of medications that you've taken? What does your insurance look like? Not that it matters for UT because those services are all included while you're here as a student, but in the event that somebody's looking for community referrals, it's nice to know like if they have insurance or if they're uninsured to be able to kind of facilitate that in a specific way. And looking at safety and risk concerns, that's really the reason that I do kind of the preemptive phone call or just little meeting just to kind of see, is this more of a like crisis or potentially like higher level of care, or is this somebody that's just kind of wanting to start the counseling process? From there, I typically schedule directly with students. I have my own calendar that I keep, so I'm able to do that directly with the student, and we can kind of be flexible on the time that we're meeting. And then they come in for a first session. doing a confidentiality review. There are some questionnaires that are more related to mental health symptoms. So typically I will go through a questionnaire about depression symptoms and anxiety symptoms, since those are the most common things that are kind of coming up. Students fill out a demographic form and a consent form to give permission to move forward with the process. And the first session is super open-ended. It's very much like some people come in and they know exactly kind of what they want to talk about and the things they want to unpack and discuss. More often than not, I think students are like, this is my very first time ever talking to anybody about any of this stuff. So
It has to be so scary for them.
absolutely. And
Yeah.
just acknowledging the vulnerability that it takes to come and do that with an absolute stranger, and trust that your information is protected, and just all of those things, always going over that, kind of ad nauseum in the first session, but very open-ended, mostly just collecting history. What's kind of the recent concerns that are bringing you in? Maybe how do past things that have happened impact kind of what's going on at this phase of your life right now, and kind of ending with what do you feel like it's important to work on? What are your goals? What are your intentions for like coming in and kind of starting this process, and kind of just getting student input on what they want to get out of the experience.
So if students have a clear understanding of what they would like to get out of it, would you say it's smoother?
I wouldn't necessarily say that it's smoother. I think there's always so many nuances, because there's so many things that are like, well, this is really impacting me right now, but I'm also well aware that all of these things that have happened before probably play a role into that. So I think sometimes it becomes really nuanced in figuring out, mostly, always from like a person-centered perspective for me, because that's how I operate. It's like, okay, if we know all of these things are things that are coming up for you, what do you feel like is the most pertinent? What's creating the biggest obstacle in like what you're trying to do right now, and kind of maybe working backwards from that. But I think we're such like multi-layered individuals that, at every step. I'm always talking about like intersectionality of all of our different identities and stuff too. I think people are bringing so much, and it's like, which one of these seems like the most pertinent right now, when we know they're all relevant, they're all important. What feels like maybe sometimes the lowest hanging fruit, maybe, that we can address like right now, in kind of this like short term.
So when you say intersectionality of identities, like what, like different identities, like as a student, as a boyfriend, as
so many things, absolutely, like all the categories that you mentioned, and then about a zillion others. Like how do you show up as a student? Are you somebody who came into UT from the start? Are you a transfer student? Are you are you a daughter, a son? Any kind of like any other kind of like identity, like things that can come up. Are you a musician? Are you an artist? Are you a designer? I think in this college there's just also so many different like fields and like paths of study. Like it just really does, all of those things I think impact how people are showing up in the room. First generation student versus maybe my entire family went to college and I'm pretty well versed in what this looks like, versus I'm the first one to ever walk in these footsteps and do this. All of those things I think really do like impact how somebody shows up, and what their expectations are or not, kind of based on like what they've experienced.
Awesome. And we're so thankful to have you here. Like we really are. And you are such a big part of the Butler School of Music, even though like you're a little bit unseen, right?
I love that.
Yeah, but you're like the bedrock, the foundation that really keeps this place up. So the students can go on and be the superstars on stage. So we really appreciate you. Yeah, but I know that, so you're a big part of Butler, but I know you're kind of a smaller part of the whole university system in general. What other resources are available just on the university outside the Butler School and the School of Fine Arts?
Oh wow, okay, yeah. I think there's a ton of stuff, and you're right. I think what I learned coming to this campus is just how massive it is. And I think it's just the knowledge, just like getting the word out there that these resources exist. I feel like I talk every day and talk to students about like, did you know this was a thing? And it's like, no, I've been here for, this is my senior year and I had no idea that these things existed. Or I talk to grad students as well, and they're like, oh, we had no idea, that we had no idea that was a thing or that program existed. I think there's the Greater Counseling and Mental Health Center. So obviously I'm kind of a unique offshoot. Our program is being kind of, embedded in the schools. So we're not operating up at the counseling center, but there's a lot of stuff going on there. There's a lot of drop-in support groups, a lot of like yoga and movement groups for people, a lot of opportunities for community building in that regard, whether you're looking for just drop-in support on a specific topic or wanting more therapeutic support in kind of a more, traditional like therapy group space. Longhorn Wellness Center is always doing like really cool stuff behind the scenes, I think from a more public health and intervention standpoint.
And what is that? The Longhorn?
Longhorn Wellness Center is it's on the first floor of the Student Services building up at Dean Keaton. And they're always just doing more work on mental health initiatives. So like suicide prevention programming, standing up and being vocal if you see bullying, or if you're concerned about like interpersonal violence, and like different programming in that regard, really looking at like student wellness, sleeping, substance use habits, and trying to kind of do more of those like bigger picture things. I get to sit individually with people and do that work, but on a more campus-wide scale, they're doing some really cool stuff there. And I always like to tell students about their Longhorn Share communities. For students who are looking for community support, but maybe don't want the formality of therapy. These are peer-led spaces that are about all kinds of different topics, from anxiety to being a first-generation student to neurodivergence, and just creating a space for students that's peer-led, that feels very low pressure for students who are looking for community. And I love those because a lot of those happen after hours. And I think the one thing we hear about the CMHC groups is that it often doesn't align with people's really rigorous class schedule, especially over here. It doesn't work out. So a lot of the shared communities happen after hours, and are more flexible in terms of participation because it's student-led. So many things.
So what does that mean? What does that look like, peer-led? Like you said, it's a chair and it's peer-led?
Yeah. So basically, the students go through training to kind of become, mental health, like peer support specialists. You get class credit for doing a couple semesters of this work, and they peer lead these spaces. So instead of it being a therapist conducting a formal group, and it's more therapeutic, it's a lot more technical, a lot more clinical. This is just like, hey, we're a group of people who have this shared experience, and we're just gathering to build community and like talk about this stuff in a very informal space. We're going to talk about things that have worked for us, things that you might not know, resources on campus that maybe we've accessed and tried, and we're going to share it kind of in this group space. Drop in, very, not having to, commit to doing any kind of regular meetings or anything like that. You can come to one and, not come to any other ones, but definitely, just peer-led in that sense of.
And can you just sit in the back and not talk?
I think you probably could.
Yeah.
I think you definitely could. A lot of them are super experiential. So there's a lot of like hands-on component to it. But I think you could also just go and check it out and just kind of like exist in the space. And I don't think there would be like no judgment on that. They're pretty open to anybody participating, and that's undergrad and grad students. There's also mind-body spaces that are accessible around campus as well for anybody who's looking just to maybe do some more like mindfulness-based like stress reduction, but you don't necessarily like need to have a specific person facilitating that experience for you. If you're like, I would just love to have somewhere to like go and be able to like do some quiet meditation, or have a formal space where I can practice doing, positive affirmations, or like a space to kind of just relax and rest. There are mind-body labs that are kind of placed strategically around campus. One of them is at the counseling center, and it very much is, you go into this cozy room with like lounge chairs, and you can just like put on headphones and like do meditations, which sounds really wild, that actually exists in real
wonderful.
life. And you can kind of go through guided meditations, or just listen to, if you just need kind of a timeout from kind of all the like sensory input that's kind of always going on campus. There's one in the counseling center. There's one in the McCombs like wellness center. I believe there's one in either the FAC or the student activity center on campus. If anyone's ever out at nursing and Delmed, there's a center out there for those students and people there to like access it, but kind of just strategically placed around campus. There's even a map for like nap zones and stuff around this campus that exists, like where you can go find like places to like take a nap and just relax and rest. There's quiet spaces to be able to just access those around campus as well if people need, just a timeout as well.
And we'll put all the information in the description below. But you seem like the most approachable person on earth, right? And you mentioned some of the ways, like there's a QR code on your door.
Sure.
But what are all the different ways people can get in contact with you?
For sure. Old school phone always works. If you're going to call me and you leave a voice message, I always tell students, please leave your EID. That's kind of how I'm able to kind of like keep up with our interactions and figure out kind of who people are and put names to faces. That's super helpful for me. So they can call and leave a voicemail. They can come by in person anytime my door is open or during those office hours on Monday afternoons at 3:30. My office is Doty 1.204B. So I'm kind of back down that hallway past the admissions office, kind of back in my little confidential corner, which is kind of how I like it. Students can self-refer using that QR code that's posted on my door, or there's different kinds of like business cards sitting outside my door that also have that information on there. They can take those and reach out that way. They can look to a staff or faculty member to refer them if they don't necessarily feel comfortable like making that first step. All of those things, I think. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, so thank you so much for coming in. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I think just it's so lovely to be in this school with all of these people just doing amazing things. So thank you for letting me be a small part of your experience here. And thank you for the like art that you're creating. I think like now more than ever, we absolutely need all of the things that are being created. And I really do think like the world needs like what's coming out of the school and like what people are going to like do in the future. So.
Yeah, I agree. The kind of a lot of the mental health problems could be solved by more art, more humanities, and more social interaction.
I like to think that. Maybe, yeah. I mean, maybe we're super biased, but
yeah, I think we are.
absolutely believe that the world needs that for sure.
Great. Well, thank you so much for coming in. I really appreciate this.
Thank you so much, Nathan.